Welcome, everybody. If you want to go ahead and have a seat, grab your refreshments and your snacks. I'd like to welcome you to the June 11th Whitaker Community General Meeting, Community Council General Meeting. Everybody have a seat. I am Derek David, Vice Chair, filling in for Margaret, the Chair, who had something pop up tonight that she had to go to right away. So we'll stumble through this without her if we can. First couple of minutes, we have a full agenda tonight, but we'll take a few minutes for some public comment. A few minutes right at the beginning, if we have any. We have some help online. If there's any questions up there, if y'all see them, yell at me. So does anybody here or online have any public comment? Online either? Careful, Brett. It's going to give you lots of time here in a minute. First speaker, Brett will be speaking regarding some EMS services, what we have going on now and what we can expect in the future. Give him a little bit of time to chat. I think you're going to have 25 to 30 minutes, so go for it. I'll welcome Brett up to the counter here. Tom could have done the last name.
Yeah, that's not medical the last time. All right, I'm gonna pull up.
Jen asked a question about an attendance sheet. Yes.
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 Thank you.
Are all those online? Can you see what I'm pulling up?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone, my name is Brett Deaton. I'm the president for the Local Firefighters Association. What I'm starting to do is going to go out and talk about the current state of the fire department. And I just want to come on to the front here and say, I represent the firefighters union. I'm not the fire department, so I'm talking about today more like hearing from the membership, presenting those stats that we have that are publicly available, kind of the direction we would like to see, what we're seeing on the front lines, where we're going to go from here. In that, some of the pieces that I brought up, if any of us, if any of you follow us, is talking about moving towards fire district. We're trying to look at what does the fire department look like going into the future? What are those next steps? One of the frustrating pieces that every biennium happens, there's some cuts to the fire department that are happening. And in reality, there hasn't really been an investment in resources on the fire department since the 1980s. What can we do to help improve that situation? So the governance committee was put together last year and they came out with several recommendations. One of those is the fire district. So I'll kind of jump into pieces here and we'll talk about some different things. So just to go over again, my name is Brett Deaton. I'm the president for IFF Local 851. I'm an engineer paramedic on the department. Been on the department for about 8 years now. Also on the hazmat technician team, and I'm also a public information officer for the state of Oregon for the incident management team. So right after this presentation, I'll actually be taking off here to the Dells to the wildfire up there. The current landscape of the department that we have. So between Eugene and Springfield, we have about 238,000 people that we serve as far as the population. Our ambulances will serve a larger population of that, and that's called an ASA or an ambulance service area. So those areas will extend out more. There's 16 stations that we have between Eugene and Springfield. The last time a station was added to the system was in the 90s, and that was in Springfield. Eugene hasn't added a station since the 80s. We have about 300 employees at the moment, give or take. And the current condition that we're at now is we started a merger around 2010. So we started to merge Eugene and Springfield Fire Departments then. So that's where we're at. We never really completed the merger. The idea was to kind of save resources. The recession happened then. So what could we do to be able to protect the communities, to save the resources, protect personnel? And that's where the merger came to fruition, was during that time. See if I can pull up. So this is a video that Eugene put out.
Have fire and medical calls increased in Eugene?
Let's do this. All right, can people see that online? Oh, no, that's just not popping up on there.
You can see it online, yeah, but not in the room.
You just played the audio, Brett.
Play the audio, we'll kind of get a sense.
Let's take a look. In 1981, the city of Eugene documented a little less than 3,000 fire and medical calls. In 2023, there were more than 30,000 fire and medical calls. That's a staggering increase of 1,000%. Back then, the average number of firefighters on duty on any given day was 37. Today, that number is 38, an increase of just one additional firefighter per day. In 1981, Eugene had 12 units to respond to fire and medical calls. More than 40 years later, that number hasn't changed. Yet the number of fire and medical calls has increased drastically. Take a look at these numbers between 1981 and 2023. Eugene needs to stabilize and grow fire services for a growing community. Find more Eugene Fire Facts online.
Oh, that's the only video I had. Sorry, it's too loud.
Hi, I'm Raleigh Taylor. Come join me for.
Yeah, we'll join Raleigh here. All right, we'll jump back over to the. So I talked about Eugene Springfield has a population around 238,000. How many medic units do you think serve that population? Yes. 7. So we have 7 ALS medic units, which are the advanced life support medic units. We have 2.5 basic life support units. Those are done with temporary staff, so they're only on for about 2 years. Your question?
Is that, private, public?
That's public. So we have a contract service called Mid Valley, and we contract with them, but they only do interfacility transfers. Unless our system gets busy and we have it built into our protocols, they'll help back up the system, which they often do. So some of the challenges we have under this current model is to merge systems. So as I talked about before, we started that merger back in 2008 and then 2010, and then kind of finalized a little bit more in 2014. It's more of a quasi merger is what I called it. And so the challenges that come from that is that we have 2 cities providing their own budgets for the fire department. So it's not a unified budget that goes forward. So the process that we have to go through, and I know a lot of other leaders in this room understand that, is that the fire department, about 26% comes from Springfield, 75% comes from Eugene, which is proportional of population size and resources there. So it's not an imbalance in that way. That being said, we still have to go between both cities. So if we want to add a system or try to revamp a system or any of that, we have to work between both cities, between both budgets to try to get something implemented at the street level. So that's a very complicated process that not even noticed necessarily in the line level, but definitely at the administrative level. On the line level, we just have to deal with the fact that rigs belong to different cities. So currently there's ambulance in Sheldon's area. That's technically a Springfield ambulance. So Springfield gets the revenue from that ambulance, but it could be staffed with Eugene employees. That rig will only be able to be fixed over in Springfield because it's a Springfield ambulance and it has to get fueled up over at the Springfield fuel station. If you have an issue on that ambulance, it has to go through Springfield ISD for the technology pieces. But we work through logistics over in Eugene for all of our medical supplies, so you get medical supplies from Eugene Logistics. That is one medic unit in the system. So imagine that across 16 stations and all the units that we have. Another frustrating piece that will come through it as well is that with Eugene's payroll tax that's implemented here, Springfield does not have that payroll tax. And so if you're in Springfield, you come over to Eugene for training, you'll get a call to ask how much you've been in Eugene for training, so they get assessed that payroll tax time while you're in Eugene. There's a lot of those factors that kind of layer into the system, and that creates a lot of inefficiencies and also duplications of process. We have HR on both sides, we have finance on both sides, we have technology on both sides. And then we're under the constraints of the general fund, which have all been part of that process of understanding the general funds and the complications with that, and then trying to work out of two general funds. Measure 5 and Measure 50 are not helping things. I'm not here to advocate against another resource in the cities. I'm just here to say that there is a potential another way that we can look at, and that's through that governance process that I've been talking about. Really what it comes down to though, is there's no long-term planning for the department. We have about a year, maybe 2 to figure out what we can do in that time, but there's no 5, there's no 10-year plan. So we don't know when we can add stations. We don't know when we can add units. If money magically appears, we're able to do something and that money immediately goes away because of budget constraints. So there's none of that long-term planning that's happening. Oh, well, call volume continues to increase very steadily. So you can see this in the last 5 years, we've had a 22% increase in call volume. In Eugene, in the last 10 years, there's been about a 50% increase in call volume. And as I've talked about before and in the video, since the 80s, we've had over 1,000% increase in call volume. Resources have not necessarily changed in that amount of time. So we're working with the same number of personnel while we're addressing a call volume that continues to grow exponentially. So we look at kind of the year-end stats for last year. I'll kind of go through this quickly. If you follow along on a kind of a Facebook page for either the department or the union, you like to be able to present those stats to people so everyone's kind of in the loop as far as just what's going on. What we're trying to shoot for is not the bare minimum. We'd like to be able to shoot for national standards, and they're national standards for a reason. So when we talk about response times to either fires or for EMS responses, we're looking for 4-minute response times. House fires grow extremely quick these days. All the plastics that we have in our materials will cause a room and contents fire to be fully involved in under 5 minutes. As far as EMS response goes, if your brain's not getting oxygen for 4 minutes, after that 4-minute mark, you start to have cell death. So these two factors in that 4-minute response time is about public safety. It's about increasing the odds we have and being able to pull someone out of a house fire, to be able to get a stop on that house fire. The house fire the other day that took down 3 to 4 structures. The initial response was 6 minutes on that, and we still had 3 structures involved immediately. 4-person staffing on engines and 5-person staffing on trucks. That's to be able to help decrease these response times. One of the studies I was reading that is if you can have 4-person staffing on a fire engine to get on a call, it will reduce the response time by 25% as far as tasks needed to be done there. 25% ends up to be a lot of time when we're on a call, and we can be able to save structures, we can save lives, and save properties. We talk about low hazard deployments. We're talking generally smaller houses, car fires, things like that. They'll still take, your house fire will still take about 17 firefighters. And that's how many firefighters we have in Springfield every day. High hazards, we're talking big nursing homes, hospitals, high rises. Those will take upwards of 43 firefighters. Now, to look at the stats that come in on this, our average response time at the moment for fire response is 5.9 minutes. We only run 3-person engines and 3-person trucks. That's all of Springfield for one house fire. We only run 38 firefighters in Eugene on a given day. And our response time for EMS are 7.2 minutes. The reliability model that we look at bases on a 5-minute response time. So at 5 minutes, we're sitting about 59.2% of the time we can get there at that period of time. Now I know wildfire is kind of all on our minds at the moment. This is a video from the Holiday Farm fire. The conditions that were up there. This fire was incredibly quick that night. It was the Labor Day fires, and I'll warn anyone if you are sensitive to flash, this next one has some flashing lights in it. This fire here lived about 114,000 acres in 14 hours. I guess it was 105,000 acres in 14 hours. That night I was on the Beachy Creek fire. They estimated that fire to move at 2.66 acres a second. The biggest piece of these fires is to be able to get on top of them quickly. So as much as we talk about fuels mitigation, being able to figure out how we create that distance between those really high flammable fuels from our houses and that, we have to be able to respond quickly on them to get them knocked down. Now, if we look at response reliability times that I just showed before, it's a little bit concerning when that's our response reliability. And now we're trying to deal with wildfires on top of it. We just simply aren't prepared to be the best that we need to be for the community. Our attrition rate at the moment is 47% for new firefighters that we bring on in the last 10 years. So this is my academy here, and I calculated 42% of my fellow academy mates have already left for other departments. That's not an easy process to go through. It takes 15 weeks to go through the academy. It's very rigorous. It takes a lot of work. It takes several years of education to get in that position. It also costs on money to put firefighters and EMS workers through academies. We're looking at anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 to get a firefighter through academy and trained up. 47% attrition rate. So, what do we look for the future? Vision for the future is to have a unified fire district. This is not a new idea. Fire districts are very common throughout Oregon. It's a popular model to move through because one thing, it's able to pull fire departments out of the general fund piece and be able to have their own district. So they can focus just on the fire department. So the hope here is to be able to create a single independent entity with taxing authority. So the fire district allows the district to be able to levy taxes in that way. Standardizes operation, benefits, and governance. One thing I didn't mention before, when you get hired onto the department, you either get hired on as a Springfield employee or Eugene employee. So your benefits packages will look slightly different. Your HR processes will be different. We have to have a whole technology group just trying to merge the two cities' infrastructure so we can be able to communicate between the two. So if you're seeing a Springfield employee coming over to Eugene, trying to work with the computers that we have here, we just have a whole team trying to work on that integration piece between the two. So a district would allow us to move to that unified front to be able to have one system that works, something that's separate from the city. Eugene has 17 different firewalls that they run. The computers in our rigs will take up to 30 seconds just to be able to pull up the maps that we need for a fire. If we're trying to get there in under 5 minutes to a fire, 30 seconds is a lot of time to pull out that information as you're getting radio reports coming in, you're trying to get dressed, which you have 2 minutes to do that. We need that information quickly and we need it readily. So we need to be able to find a way that we can pull that out of the system and just allow us to pull up the information that we need. And then the reliable and transparent funding. So to move to a district, you would see a separate line item on your taxes and it would just be for the fire department. You see fire district on there. We'd have a board, it's 5 people on the board. People would elect those individuals for the board. And then you could be a part of that budget process. You can go in those meetings and watch those meetings. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for the public to see how the fire department spends their money, where it goes, for us to be able to understand where that money's spent, be able to have a little bit more control on that money, just making sure it's going to the resources that we think are most needed within this community. So I've addressed some of these pieces here, but I guess the biggest things we're going to talk about is fixing efficiencies, the direct public input, the transparent budget, the financial stability. If we have a set tax rate, we're able to see how much money's coming in. We can actually do that long-term planning. We can look 5-10 years out. Eugene needs to add 3 fire stations right now. That's how far we are behind. That's not in the budget now. There's talks about doing it. There's talks about adding 1 station, but if we need 3 stations right now just for response reliability, we don't have a plan for that. Fire district would be one option to be able to get us towards that plan.
What are those identified localities?
One is up on Chambers, the other one's over on MLK, and the third one's north of Beltline, that Crescent and Delta area. Yeah. Next step. So currently it's sitting in the government committee, the governance committee, to be able to kind of provide that direction. What I'm trying to do is to get out and educate the public on the fire district is the best option to go as far as budgeting. It's the best option to go for safety. I don't see another option that's being provided to the committee at the moment that fixes either of those issues. The only other options on there would not affect the budget piece. It might look at some separation pieces from the city, but still comes down to budget prioritization out of the general funds. And the other option on the table that's still being considered is separation of the two departments, which would cost millions of dollars between both cities. It would be highly inefficient. As I pointed out before, Springfield runs out of every single engine of stuff they have with one house fire. So they have to, every time they have a house fire, we have to send Eugene rigs over there to be able to cover Springfield's area, which works in the system we have now. The system's built. If we don't have that in there, it's separate. There are delays in that system. We go back to an old system where they have to do an all call and bring firefighters back in to help staff engines. Question?
Yeah, if you wanted to build something, fire station, some capital asset, would you be able to issue your own bonds?
Yep. So then the next steps would be the draft for transition to plan. So what we'd like to see is a direction on this from governance committee to go, let's take a look at this fire district. Let's get the kind of the idea drawn out to make sure that it's feasible, to make sure that it works. And then let's figure out a timeline and implementation for that. There's a lot of community education that goes into that. We're just asking for that process to occur. For 30 years now, we've just seen us kind of sidestepped as far as that process. There's at least 3 reports that I'm aware of that have suggested that we move to a fire district. Now starting in 2004. So this is not a new discussion. I'm just here to revive that discussion and go, it needs to happen now. Your safety is at risk.
Could you identify what those Stanford rationale was Stanford?
You want my personal opinion on it? Their cities typically tend to have a lot of, I'll put it this way, tend to have a lot of ego around the fire department kind of being the face of the city. And there's also the budget pieces to that as well. One thing that'll happen too is understanding, like, if the fire department pulls out of the budgets, what pieces of those budgets would need to stay to be able to support additional city services that are already part of that fire budget. So there is that question to it. And then there's the other question of just like, some people just have a tendency to associate the fire department and the city as that one image. What are we able to do if we don't have the fire department part of that? That's the question we have there. Yeah. So the call to action that I have, so I'm out here just trying to encourage the public to be involved in this conversation. I know there's a lot of information I've kind of thrown out. I'm sure there's a lot of questions with it. Not everyone's going to agree with me on it. What I'm saying is we have a safety issue. We haven't addressed it for decades now. We're at a precipice to be able to figure out a solution. The district is not a new idea. It is a favorable idea. There's a lot of good opportunities that the fire district provides, and that's the direction we want to see at least played out. So the public is aware of the opportunities there. So let your city councilors know, I know you have 2 here tonight. I will say I appreciate Elijah Kaczynski. She rode along with us on Medic One the other day. Took that opportunity to really experience what the system is like, how busy it is. I appreciate that opportunity, and hopefully consolation will get you along at some point. I like it to be able to do that. Our medic units are busy. We'll run 24, 48-hour shifts. We can be force hired up to 72 hours, which is not uncommon. One of our single rules is already at 6 force hires in the last month. So basically you get told that you're working. So that's a 24-hour shift that they're getting force hired for. So you work 10 shifts in a month. Now you're getting told you're getting work 6 extra shifts. Your medic unit's running anywhere from 15 to 30 calls a day. That doesn't leave a lot of time for sleep, doesn't leave a lot of downtime, and we're having to, on my end, deal with the mental health aspect of that. That's what I get to deal with, but I think the effect that you all can appreciate is that the safety is being affected on your end. Is that medic unit going to be available for response? If you haven't already, we started up the helpeugenespringfieldfire.com website. For those who might have signed up early and tired of all the updates from that, there is a daily and a weekly one. So if you want to change your subscription, you can do that just to kind of get the daily and weekly updates as far as how often we run out of units. This is a point in time notification. So in the month of May, we were out of advanced life support units 79 times. We were down to our last one 255 times. We ran out of engines in West Eugene 3 times, in Springfield 10 times, and we used over half of our engines throughout the entire fleet 4 times. And these are concerning numbers. You can bring it up to the population and go, your security is at risk. When we're out of ambulances, it's just a data point that you see through the email. But what we have to deal with is the repercussions of that. So The other day, there's an individual in Eugene who was having a stroke. The closest advanced life support unit that was available was coming from Cottage Grove. That is our backup option. Sometimes we're pulling LFA units off of Territorial to be able to come respond to calls over in Springfield. I work on engine 9 over on Good Pasture. We're the first swing medic up. So they will shut down our engine to be able to get onto a medic unit and run calls. In the last week, we've run 4 of those calls. So we are shutting down engines for entire areas to be able to run additional medic calls. Those are the concerns that I have for your safety. As we move into summer, as I head off to a wildfire here after this, it's just the reality that we're in. We can either take the steps forward and realize that there might be some growing pains with it, but the fire district is the best option going forward. And we'll continue to provide more of that information both on our Facebook and on our website with that. I open up if there's any questions.
Got one. Is the 40% attrition rate due to stress caused by low?
Yes. Yeah, most of it is due to stress. So there's a number taken out of that. So it's about 41, 42% is directly related to people who have voluntarily left. And the remainder of that are people who did not make it through the end of their probation. And that could be for any number of reasons.
Thank you.
I think Travis has a question as well. And if the person on the phone can mute themselves, there's quite a bit of feedback online.
Hi, I was wondering what has been the increase in call volume since 2020, and out of a monthly call volume, what percentage of your calls are responding to drug overdoses or fires that are caused by either flat out arson or irresponsible fire behavior?
Yeah, I don't have a direct stat for that latter one. I can see if I can figure that out. That being said, I know a common question that comes along is with our homeless population and what call volume attributes to that. And that rolling average is about 15% of our calls. As far as from 2020, in the last 5 years, we've seen a 22% increase in our call volume.
Okay, yeah, I think just to follow up on that, I think that a huge problem with a huge budget problem is based on policy and the amount of lawlessness that we have in our community that has substantially increased, especially over the last 4 years. So I think a big factor, I actually, I agree that the fire department needs more. Obviously, you guys haven't really gotten bigger since the 80s. You need more resources. However, I think that a lot of the people that are sucking the resources could be dealt with through better policy.
So one of the pieces of that is the alternative response piece. So how do we look at addressing call volume for particular populations or particular calls that come in, and how we can be able to do that? So we would like to expand into that area to be able to figure out what is a better response piece that we can do. It doesn't always have to be an advanced life support unit. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to really jump into that space with the general funds that we've had. So we've done some grant funding pieces, and so we have an alternative response unit. We have 2 of them right now. One's focused on kind of lower acuity calls, so just calls that don't really resonate to the life or death piece. And then the other one's dealing with nursing homes within the Eugene area. Those are both grant funded though. So we don't have anything at the moment that addresses those funds in the general funds, which is why we want to move to the fire district to be able to open up some of those funds, figure out what that responsibility looks like.
Those are federal grants?
Those are state grants. That was under the Peace Health. Peace Health leaving, there was another law that was put in place. So it's kind of a coordination between state and Peace Health grant funding.
So I saw at the beginning of your presentation that there are 38 full-time firefighters. Is that for Eugene only or for Eugene and Springfield?
That's on average in a day in Eugene.
Okay, but I assume there's some larger number, but it looked like there were 300 full-time employees. So what are the other 200 job descriptions? What are those?
Yeah, so there's EMS workers that work in that. So that would be your basic life support. We have a temporary basic life support units, so we have 2.5 of those. We've had trouble being able to fully staff those. But those are other units that we have out there. Then there's your single role units that we just started up. So they're primarily focused on just EMS work. So those pieces are in there. We also have a few of our training staff that are in that position as well. Though we are very light on training staff. We have an academy, I was just told, starting in July, it's going to have about 40 people in it. We have one EMS instructor. So we'll have to pull fire instructors over to try to help out with that EMS portion as well. But you have your 3 shifts, and then you also have Springfield and what they add on. So we look at a shift strength at about 68 to 72 per day, and say multiply that by 3, and the additional staff will add in all that.
So there's not 240 administrative people sitting.
We're pretty light on administration. Yeah.
Curious about it.
Appreciate your question.
Two-part question. I noticed at the beginning, you mentioned 300 full-time. Is that both Eugene, Springfield, or Eugene?
Both Eugene and Springfield.
Okay. And you mentioned a percentage, is a higher percentage, 75%, or Eugene, correct?
It's about 75% that Eugene contributes to the fire budget.
Okay, so I'm trying to get the ratio. You mentioned the 3 to 3 fire trucks as opposed to the 5 to 5. Are each of the 16 stations equipped with those trucks that are able to have the 5 firefighters as opposed to 3? Will that mean retrofitting the equipment in order to accommodate with that 5 to 5 ratio?
Yeah. So the trucks that we run, we have 3 of those. One is housed right over here at Station 2, so that'll be your local station. The other one's housed downtown, Station 1, and then the other one, Station 3, over next to Walmart and Jerry's in Springfield. So we just have 3 of those rigs that would take the 5.
And the second part of my question is my observation. I've been in talks, I see nonprofits called the paramedics and a ladder truck comes along, but that there's no fire. And I want to have for operational miles and the fact that the nonprofits, so many of them are exempt from participating and paying the taxes. Would a fire district make it a necessity for everyone to contribute and pay towards that service, those services? Thank you.
Yeah, so 2 pieces of that. The first part of it, you'll often see an engine or a ladder show up first on a medical call. We've done some changes to that. That being said, if you even just add in the BLS units that we have, you're looking at 9 units on the street. With the call volume that we have, we can't get immediately to the high acuity calls of people that are having life or death situations quickly, unless we have engines responding to those. If our units are too busy, it's going to be an engine responding anyway to help dictate how that care is going to happen before we can get an ambulance there. Because sometimes what we'll do is we'll send an engine to determine what that call is like, to be able to determine, do we need a basic life support unit? Do we need an advanced life support unit? What's going to be best? So our engines are really out there trying to triage patients to try to help us manage the medic system.
Fire chief explained to me that the paramedics per union were not allowed to bench more than 100 pounds. So therefore, the necessity of the ladder truck was deployed in case the event had a morbidly obese person. However, fire department does have other use, the heavy vans that are able to use Hoyer lifts or whatever. My question was to that fire chief was, how often does that happen? He said more than I think. As a school bus driver, me, single, by myself, I was expected to lift 120 pounds by myself. So I'm a little surprised at the ease because most of those fire personnel were pretty tough. And so I don't get 100-pound limit.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with Chief. I haven't seen a limit on it. What we do try to do is prevent injury because firefighters off the job, it's going to cost more and you have to have overtime and everything else. So we just try to be precarious about how much we do lift. And so we try to get extra personnel to be able to help out in those situations. If we do have an individual who is heavier and we have to call an extra truck in to be able to help, there are often times where very precarious situations, very long, small hallways, trying to get an individual out who's in a medical emergency. So trying to get extra people there to be cautious about making sure we're not hurting our backs. Otherwise, that can be a career.
Should the call taker be prepared to reach that though?
Typically, if we get the information, the dispatch is able to ascertain that, then yeah, then we'll get the information and we know like, all right, maybe we need to have an extra crew come and help us out.
Thank you.
Yeah, we got some more questions out here. No, about April.
Last September, I was experiencing chest pain. Called 911. It got really bad. Your ambulance or the big red truck was there in probably 4 minutes. I had a stimmy. I was on an ambulance. I got to the capsule. I had a stent in my heart in 45 minutes. And they told me, you're a lucky boy. Most people with a stimmy don't have good success. And so I want to thank you. I also want to say I was an avid supporter of the fire service fee. I think I'm real active in the neighborhood associations. There's just so much misconception about what you do in finance. I'd love to help. We should, like through the Neighborhood Leaders Council, have a citywide forum on this so people really understand it. Because a lot of people say, oh, I just don't understand it, so I'm against it. And it's just unfair.
I appreciate that. It's good to see you here with us today. I appreciate that. It's good to hear. Door to balloon time under an hour is impressive. So it's good to hear that. I look forward to the opportunity. Yeah. So, all right, one sec, sorry. Okay.
What is the resistance to the fire general fund? Why is it hard to not just get this done? It's such a common sense solution that I don't understand where the hang up is. And where exactly are you getting resistance to something that is, if this were in a private sector, it would have been done a decade ago?
I have some of the same questions.
I'm not trying to be, I don't want to overlap and ask a really long-winded question. I'm just figuring out what's the holdup?
So this district discussion has been talked about for years now.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. That was a great question. It ends up continuing to be put on the back burner there. So we get motivation and it pushes along and it doesn't go anywhere. There are complicated steps to it, and I won't deny that, but I think we get held behind the fact that there's complications and we don't get past that to go, we just need to bite the bullet. We need to be able to figure this out.
But that's not the answer to my question. Where's the holdup?
It has to do with the cities.
Like, are you saying Eugene City, we have 2 counselors here tonight,
So we have Eugene City Council and Springfield City Council.
and we have someone here tonight who could answer that question then. We have a city councilor tonight.
Yes.
Who can answer it. Very good. Itchy.
Turn back to Will.
Just to follow up on my bond question, that would have to be put to the public, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So district would work the same as like what the city would have to do for any of those pieces. Has to go to the voters for the approval, whether it's a bond or a levy in that way.
Okay, thank you.
So the overlapping in our community does not necessarily include just Eugene Springfield. So is there any consideration in the fire district to include like Goshen, Pleasant Hill, Junction City, Coburg, so more of the whole metropolitan area?
The first domino that has to go is Eugene Springfield. So there are considerations long-term to look at what that inclusion of areas around us look like. Volunteer rates are dropping around us. And as we see that, we end up responding into these areas a lot more as what we call mutual aid. So if they don't have the resources available, we go there to help, or if they need additional resources, we go there to help. We see that happen more and more, and that is all around Eugene Springfield, which pulls resources out of the area. Long-term, looking at a bigger district in that way is a very viable option. Look at Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. That's exactly what they've done there, to be able to get a larger area. You're able to spread that tax base out over a lot more people, so you don't have the greater increases as far as affording a fire department. And then they're able to have a fire department that is able to be bigger and pull in some of those bigger state and federal grants as well to be able to help subsidize additional resources. Okay. Yep. Any additional questions? Mike?
My name's Mike McFarland, and I'm plant here, but I wanted to thank the, I'm in communications. I wanted to thank the organizers to let us go first, because I would have to do this, and Brett's far more qualified, but I wanted to pick up on a few things I've heard. As far as the employees leaving, another piece that is important to know is that they get about 20% more pay and less hours. Other places. So Eugene is known as a really busy fire in the fire community, right? So it's turning out that we're training a lot of good firefighters that kind of go through our system and then go somewhere else. So that's, that's something to think about. As far as your five, it's my everyday work. And getting to the government, 3 governments, or how many governments, this is the county pieces to move in the same direction is nearly impossible. And I mean that's not necessarily a knock on any one of the entities. They all have different needs, and they all have different factors that go into their fire department, such as our big thing is compression, and that's property tax. We can't ask for too much, or it throws the whole system off. And that is different for Springfield, it's different for Eugene. And it makes the conversation almost a different one in different cities.
I guess my question is why has Glenn County taken this over a decade ago? So that we're talking about Springfield, Eugene, which are the major areas we're talking about tonight. Why not just do it at the county level? And it has to be a whole lot of duplication of services, everything.
Oh, there's millions of dollars of duplicated services. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
So one piece of that, I'll have to jump on through the opportunities, but the counties control the ambulance piece. And so, actually Councilor Krasinski is going to be on that committee to look at what are we doing as a county as far as the ambulance response and that piece. But we have designated areas. So Eugene and Springfield are each kind of given these areas to respond to. And so we take over that piece. As far as the fire department response, that's been dealt with at the city level, or if it's a district level, kind of around the communities that are under that district. Thank you all for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Lindsay, do you have the name of the speaker for the next in line, the crisis care?
Yes, may I present?
Yes, come on up and help me present. We're gonna learn a little bit about Willamette Valley crisis care and how they can help us in the community.
It's my honor. Thank you, Derek. Yeah, it is my honor today to introduce Willamette Valley Crisis Care. People are kind of calling them Cahoots 2.0. That's unofficial, of course. This is Laurel, Andy, and Michelle, and they are going to talk about kind of what they're doing, where they have to go, and anything else that doesn't fall within those categories. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Laurel. I'm here with Andy and Michelle, and we're 3 of the 4 founders of Willamette Valley Crisis Care, which is the belovedly referred to in the community as Cahoots 2.0. We're made up of direct service workers, crisis workers. I myself have been on the van since about 2015 working, got my social work license while doing that work and helped to supervise and credential up the team that has performed the service in the city for the past 35 years. When the vans went down in April, this group found that to be unacceptable. We really wanted to come back to work. We knew and could see the value of the work that we were doing as an overnight shift worker who's worked weekends for the past 10 years. I knew that there was no one between, nothing between a person and their claim for suicide or their mental health emergency except potentially a police officer. And that was really difficult to accept. And so we got really busy convincing the city council and the budget committee and anyone else who would listen to us about the value of our work. We had a lot of help with that, including the University of Oregon's data science lab run by Rory Goltz, and an economist from the Department of Economy at the University of Oregon, as well as, that's John Davis, and then Claire Herbert from the Sociology Department. All have been doing all this research on mobile crisis response, or MPR, or cahoots. And so we had some help to be able to like show people the value of the integrated healthcare model that we use, which is a medic and a counselor, kind of moving in between the systems of police, of fire and EMS, and behavioral health. We did have good luck with the city budget, and there is some hope and reasonable hope based on the fact that we're, as Michelle would see, sort of building the plane while we're flying it, trying to figure out all the pieces of how this works and bring on the mentors and the people who can organize and have skills that we don't have. And so we've founded our nonprofit. We selected our board, and we have our first board meeting next week, designing bylaws for a worker-driven nonprofit. We applied for large grants. We've been meeting with, I'll let Michelle talk about New York. She just got back from the Alternative Response Convention in New York City with the policing project, but working with technical assistance nonprofit to help with implementation tools to build our own revenue streams. There is a fee-for-service model. Thanks to Senator Wyden, there are funds that can be accessed where we can get money by billing Medicaid. So there are lots of ways to make this happen, and we definitely believe that it should. And I'd be really happy to share any of that research information. I'd be happy to send it out through whatever email makes sense, or kind of explore some of that data together if people are interested. Do you want to talk about the?
Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm also, I've been with Cahoots since 2016 until April, and I am an LCSW and an EMT. And one of the things that we did get to participate in, which we have for a lot of years, is to be able to represent our community, the community of Eugene, this innovative model on a national stage. So in 2023, Georgetown Law and New York University had their first alternative response convening to talk about what mobile crisis was going to look like across the communities. We knew that there was a lot of communities that were asking for an alternative to the traditional systems that we have been using to manage mental health, homelessness, social issues, kind of all of that social safety net that we know that our police are not equipped to handle and should be handling. I did like what Chief Caven said at one of the council meetings, where it's like, if you ask, fire or police to be the multi-tool, they will be. But we need to ask as a community, do we want to keep asking them to do that? And so this was a convening of professionals who were looking at, this vision of what mobile crisis could look like. And I know Cahoots, kind of when we hit the national stage in 2020, because there was a lot of organizations going, wow, is there a different vision for a professional that is the right professional for that type of call? And they were like, oh, this isn't new. Eugene's been doing this for 30 years. So, a lot of questions came up from that. So we were part of that convening and kind of part of answering a lot of questions about how Eugene has been rolling out, what that mobile integrated crisis care looks like, because we are unique in realizing that when you're looking at crisis or somebody who is needing assistance, whether it is through a public health lens or through a public safety lens, like you've got a whole person, right? There's very few crises for people in distress where there's like, oh, we can just separate out, this is just a purely emotional issue or it's a purely medical issue. And so that idea of, what Eugene kind of created over 36 years, recognizing that our community is saying, we want to treat the whole person with a provider or a team that can treat a whole person. So fast forward 2 years, and we were invited back to the second annual convening. It had grown from 100 at the original one to 300 people at the convening itself. And there are now programs throughout the country that are grappling with, kind of what Eugene is right now with the investigation, like being asked to investigate what does mobile crisis look like in your community? Should it be in-house? Should it be a hybrid? Should it be an RFP with a nonprofit? the nation is grappling with these same things. And there's a lot of programs that have been created in all of those different functions, from community safety departments to completely separate nonprofits that are providing, you know, the providers not attached to public safety. And so it was really neat to be able to be part of that, to grow our network, to be able to reconnect with a lot of the funders and the advocates and, you know, other professionals who are working within these spaces, who are working within cities, to be able to bring that information back to, you know, a city that's asking, who's grappling with the same questions. So it was really exciting. And we look forward to, you know, being able to be the technical advisory committee to our own community with an evolution. Like, we realized that there were things that we were having to learn. We are having to figure out, what does this look like? What does it look like to be a mobile integrated crisis team in 2025?
I'll just add that, you know, we're able to do this work because of our community. Since Cahoots went down in April, you know, our little group of founders has had a ton of support from the community. A group called Friends of Cahoots started up, and we've just had an outpouring of offers of support, which has been so appreciated and really kept us afloat during this really difficult time. And if anyone wants to stay in touch with us, we have a new website. Our website is launched. It's WillametteValleyCrisisCare.org. And you can sign up for our email subscription there, or the Friends of Cahoots is on there as well. And we're also putting updates out regularly on our social media platform. We have Facebook as well as Instagram, Willamette Valley Crisis Care. So we really need the community support as we figure out how to get back to work. And yeah, we just appreciate everyone staying in touch.
Yeah, I think it's like 2,800 calls or missed opportunities we've had now since April 7th, where we would have been going on those calls. Working with the data science team from the U of O, we learned from Nathan Burton that, you know, there's this direct substitution of about 17% of calls that we were able to take from police. But if you look at the overlapping mandate, the types of calls that could have gone to either Cahoots or officers, taking out the calls that would like just be for Cahoots and taking out the calls that would just be for officers that wouldn't be appropriate for Cahoots, it's like 46% of the welfare checks that we were doing. So we really do want to come back and do this work as soon as possible. It's really deeply important. Not only to us, but as Andy said, to the community. We've been just like happily overwhelmed by the amount of folks who want to show support. So that's super appreciated. And we are going to keep moving forward. Yes, totally. Yeah, does anyone have any questions for us? Yeah.
Where are you guys out of? Are you from Oregon?
Like personally?
No. The organization.
The organization, yeah. We are right here in Eugene.
We're former Cahoots workers.
Former Cahoots workers, well, former and current. I currently still do work at Whitebird and work on the van in Springfield. But so our fly list is made up of van workers who know how to work.
Okay, but my question was, well, I'm sorry, I didn't do it very.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Somebody told me that the company was actually out of Wyoming, Rural Wyoming LLC. Is that true?
No, there's nothing true about that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Not Wyoming.
You're registered with the state corporation here in Oregon as a active nonprofit organization.
Yes.
You have your LLC here in Oregon.
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Will you be able to facilitate the new work with the old equipment?
Yeah, I mean, we're asking the city to use those assets. That is like a goal that we have. There's mobile technology that we used to be able to share with the city to see our calls. You know, we use the 911 comms and dispatchers, police radios. We sit on station 2, have in the past. So those are our same goals. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, rather than getting all that new, that would be so.
Yeah, I mean, we're asking to like stay inside of the system, right? That's what we've done in the past, and we've built and utilized that trust with the other systems and with EPD and with EMS in order to work together and be wherever we can, where instead of them. That's the goal, and so staying inside of that system is important to us.
Yeah, Travis.
Go for it, Travis.
Hi. Yeah. First, I want to say that I do believe that there are aspects of what Cahoots does that is tremendously important, or was tremendously important in our community. Over the years, I've seen them do a lot of good work. That being said, I've also witnessed Cahoots dumping inebriated, houseless, drugged out people in the Whitaker neighborhood, in and around Washington Jefferson Park twice. I've seen them respond to my call concerned about an inebriated individual laying on the ground, that they then gave water and a granola bar and proceeded to allow them to get into their car and drive away. These are very concerning. My first question is the new Willamette Valley Crisis Care planning on collecting and giving the data to those that need it in order to actually figure out a solution to the problems that we have on our streets?
Yeah, that is thank you for asking that question. We had a lot of people ask us that question when we started talking with folks, and especially with city councilors, because there has been such a gap in data, and we have had to scramble to find data outside of the traditional ways because we weren't able to get it. So we are actually very much so dedicated to gathering and sharing data, bringing on, having the wonderful relationship with Rory Rolfe and her department and Nathan Burton. They've been working on data outside of just using internal means, just had data for 1.5 years and have come up with lots of good information about what would that look like if we could share. I'm really excited to see. So yeah, most definitely, Travis.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to hear that, because I think that that's a big component to changing policy is getting to know who we're dealing with on the streets over and over and over for many, many years of all of our lives, and paying out of our tax dollars to have you guys some granola bars and water. That being said, I'm literally looking at the state website for business registration, and Willamette Valley Crisis Care is registered to a entity called Registered Agents Incorporated. When you look up that in the state registry, that goes to another registered agent called Northwest Registered Agents LLC. When you look that
as
up,
a nonprofit management professional, I would love to answer this question. If
just a
you all
second,
don't
let
mind.
me finish. Let me finish what I'm saying. When you look up the Northwest Agent LLC, you get Registered Agents Incorporated. That is out of Portland, Oregon. However, the manager is an LLC called Bananatizing, like Bonanza, I think, but Bananatizing. But I do want to make the point that as a public benefit LLC, a nonprofit, it does you no service for, first of all, not telling the truth. You guys are registered out of Wyoming. I'm looking at the state website right now. And second of all, how are we supposed to say, yeah, let's give you guys $500,000 to start and a couple million down the road if you're as a public benefit not transparent? This LLC out of Wyoming is connected to fraud. It's connected to dark money. I think it's ludicrous. So let's come clean.
Kind of limit to the question, but
Maybe Genevieve wants to answer that.
Yeah, so there is a requirement that in order to register any business, that you have to have a registered agent that is able to accept mail between normal business hours. Now, you can understand by the nature of their work that maybe Cahoots cannot get a certified letter at their van. There are these things called register agent services. And yes, they are people with a mailbox and they pay someone to be there to get your certified mail and receive it. But that does not mean that any of the employees are from Wyoming, that any of the money is going to Wyoming, other than the usually pretty nominal fee of about $150 a year that it costs to have a registered agent service.
Thank you, Genevieve. That's really not the point I was trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that if there was ever a problem getting a hold of the person that is listed as their registered agent or management, I'm talking about a problem with money like Eugene Weekly had, a problem with money like Homes for Good had, if you catch what I'm saying. And that is not acceptable. You guys need to come clean. You need to be transparent, and you need to be able to, people are going to have to be able to hold you to account. And that door on Gold Street in Wyoming does not answer their door or their emails.
Okay, I hear that, Travis, and I appreciate the energy behind it. And I did not know that we did sign up for a PO box. And I
do your research, because the optics are bad.
Thank you. Thank you, Travis.
Learning as we go, certainly not trying to be untruthful, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. One more question, and we got to get moving here.
So I want to say a few things. I was at the city council meeting when the town hall happened before, and just all of the unrest around what was happening with Cahoots. And I just want to say thank you for just at least getting the ball rolling and getting people, just at a point where there's somebody there. And that is huge for all of us. And we appreciate it. I had a question regarding the county response, that there was some sort of I don't really understand this. That's why I'm asking. There's a county response that has a Cahoots-like service, correct? Okay, and they said that they were going to come in and pick up the slack, and that was one of the things I heard. Don't know if it's true or not, but I want to know what your relationship is with that response and working together with them.
Yeah, I would be really hopeful that we would work together under, Chief Haven's good watch. And my guess is that it would just be whoever's closest to the call would go to the call, right? There's plenty of work to do and plenty of calls to go on. There are some things we can do that they're not able to do. So if there's any kind of medical component to the call, if it's a welfare check, if it's a call where there's substances as a part of the call, those are all calls that Cahoots can respond to that the county service cannot.
Can I add something? Yeah. So I just want to add from the fire side, if you look at what an ALS unit can do and what a BLS unit can do. So a BLS unit can do a portion of what an ALS unit can do, and the ALS unit can do a lot more. So when we look at how Cahoots 2.0 or where mobile integrated crisis care fits into our systems, like we're able to do overlap of law enforcement type calls, which is one system. We're able to do fire EMS like type calls because we're running with the medical piece with the medical director as well. And we're able to do behavioral health type calls, especially those ones that are billable to Medicaid underneath ARPA or the Cahoots Act. So the county's team is able to do those behavioral health billable Medicaid calls. But that's like having a BLS unit say, I do the same thing as an ALS unit.
Very good answer. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful information. Appreciate all the info. Local support, being that you're all local, I appreciate that. We have next up some budget, some folks from the city. They're going to talk about some budget stuff going on. I'm going to try some names here by the best I can. Ty Zimmerman, the chair of the budget committee. Eliza Kaczynski. Did I do okay?
Yes.
I can do Lindsay Leach really well. That's Ward 1 and Ward 7, counselor for the city. They'll come up here to ask some questions, or to answer some of your questions. But what we're gonna do is they're gonna each speak for a little bit, and then we'll wait and have our questions after they all speak together, so we don't get kind of convoluted in between each one of them as they speak, and they can remember what they're talking about. So after they're all done talking, we'll open up for a few questions.
Thank you. I'll try to be pretty quick and leave more of the time for questions than me rambling. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Kai Bruce Zimmerman. I am the outgoing chair of the City Budget Committee. I've been chair for 4 years, on the committee for 7, and my second and final term ends June 30th. I have presumably had my last meeting as we finished the Budget Committee's portion of the budget process at the end of May. I'm also involved in a whole bunch of other community volunteering. My hats include co-chair of the Active Bethel community, which is a role I've had since 2018, meaning I know exactly what it takes to put on meetings like this. And I'm very thankful to the Whitaker Community Council for having us here today. I know the work that went into that behind the scenes. And then I'm also currently on the long range planning committee for the Bethel School District and the finance committee for Square One Villages, as well as on a pair of nonprofit boards, Well Mama and the Jewish Federation of Blaine County. And then I take other ad hoc committees kind of whenever I get a chance. My day job is I'm a stay-at-home dad of a 5-year-old who's going to be entering kindergarten this fall, which is just spectacular and terrifying and wonderful in all sorts of ways. And I also have a little side gig as a statistician for chess.com. So that's who I am. And as far as the budget, I mostly want to leave it to questions, but I do just want to say that this was an extremely difficult budget process, certainly the hardest one in my 7 years on the committee. And there was a point within even mid-May where I was worried we were going to be looking at a final budget proposal from the budget committee that I wasn't even sure I could vote for. I was contemplating all sorts of possibilities. Ultimately, we were able to find some compromises. We were able to avoid the cuts that were most concerning. We still passed a budget that had pretty extensive cuts in it, and we left ourselves with a very ongoing, active conversation about next steps. But we were able to avoid cutting some things like the Eugene Public Library, the Sheldon Community Center, the Amazon Pool, neighborhood associations, and some other things that had looked like they might be on the chopping block. So I'm satisfied with where we got to. I think within the overall scope of our situation, we did a good job this year, but there's a whole lot more work to do. And I look forward to taking your questions and talking more about that.
Hi, I'm Eliza Kaczynski. I am the Eugene City Councilor for Ward 1, which is downtown Jefferson, West Side friendly area, so sort of south here. I've been on council since January, so I am the newest councilor. But before that, I was on the budget committee for 7 years. I was vice chair for 4 years, 3 years, 3 years. And was also on several of the revenue committees that the city put together to look at different revenue options to help fill our funding gap. I want to second Ty's comment that out of all of the budgets I've worked on for the city over the past 8 years, this was by far the most challenging. And I was not surprised that it was by far the most challenging. Eugene has been, like almost all cities and counties around Oregon, Eugene has been struggling with structural budget deficits for a very, very long time. A lot of this is coming out of the way that the state property tax laws work. So there were some things passed in the 90s that put some pretty strict limits and caps on property taxes in a way that's pretty atypical. So one of the things people will sort of say, so basically what it's saying is that your property taxes can't go up more than a certain amount in a year, even if like inflation or the market value of your property goes up way more than that. That doesn't reset when you sell your property. So you know, folks who are moving in from California, buying new properties, they're paying roughly half of what they're, bought the property for in property taxes. And this has resulted in the revenue that comes in for Eugene from property taxes growing much, much slower than the expenses, especially when you look at things like inflation or the need to expand services as we grow as a city. And so we've been struggling with this gap, and I can go into like way more detail on all of this because I get way too in the weeds with this. But we've been struggling with this gap for a long time. And so we've been, I think every single budget I worked on was a budget where we were making really difficult cuts. And we knew that coming into this budget, all the things that were kind of like, okay, maybe we can do without that. Those things have already been cut years ago. We made something like $60 million worth of reductions over the past decade. And so when we got to this budget cycle, we knew that we had $11 million gap where we were going to have to fill that. We started a revenue committee about a year and a half ago. Revenue committee recommended a solution. Council passed that solution. That solution got referred to the ballot, which meant that we couldn't count on that to help pay for those services that we knew we were going to have the gap for, which meant that we ended up with a lot of really challenging cuts in that budget. And we were working down to the last minute to try and figure out how to avoid that. And we were fortunately able to do so for some. We still had a lot of really challenging cuts in this budget, and we're going to have to see how we create that more sustainably in the long term. With that sort of really broad overview, I will pass it on to Lindsay to leave more time for questions for the rest of you.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you, Ty. I love hearing your history and all the things you're involved with. I'm with the Legion, the Ward 7 City Councilor, have been for about 2.5 years. When I came on council, I was first time being on the budget committee, but I was also appointed to the Revenue Advisors Committee by the mayor. And that was directly working with the city manager and a lot of different kinds of diverse community members. And we poured through this huge booklet of all of the different types of revenue that we could potentially bring into the city to try to, you know, analyze and fill that gap. Eliza went into a really good amount of detail on that one. So here we are. We did, in order to save those things that we find all of us really most dear, we did pass a stormwater fee increase that would give us just enough to take care of some of those pieces. And it's not sufficient. You know, we have a lot of work to do. We've got to, I think, take it all the way back to the bare bones and start to analyze how are we going to do this and move forward. But I think I want to kind of go back to all of the things that we have heard today. So we've heard from the fire department. I really appreciate that presentation. I think we had a lot of questions about, you know, what does that mean, having a district, and why is it taking so long? Why are we here where we're at today? We're with an unfunded, you know, fire department. I'm deeply concerned about it as well. I don't think a fire district is a bad idea by any means. I think there's a lot of information that we have to explore, and we're doing that, right? What I heard is, wow, okay, the complications of compression, which is all of the different districts kind of having to meet a certain amount of taxing income, right? We have to work together to be able to balance that. Once you hit too much, it all starts shrinking. And so there's a cap on how much the fire district would be able to take, how much the cities would be able to take, how much the county would be able to take. So it all gets super complicated. And we are working on that. We're going to be talking about that through the fall, hopefully, and to the next years. So I hope we come to a good conclusion. Thank you to Willamette Valley Crisis Care for coming. You know, that was one of the things that was the most concerning for me when we looked at a budget that did not include alternative response. our first proposed budget still fully funded it. And then Whitebird ended the contract with the city. And then when we had to make all these cuts, the city manager took all of that alternative response funding out because we didn't have anyone else to step in and take a contract. And so then these guys, they really got themselves together very, very quickly, really pulled out all the stops in terms of trying to get community support, have done that, done a ton of stuff to get ready to take a contract. And so we will be passing a budget that will likely hold just enough money to get started. And then we can keep going from there. And so none of us have the capacity to actually contract with an organization, so that's not our decision, but we were able to hold the funding and hold the space and support for wanting that level of work. And I believe folks are going to be able to take up that stand. So we can start with questions. I saw your hand first.
What is the Eugene City Manager's annual salary?
She gets, I think it was 200 and somewhere around 250 or 60.
So we're tightening belts on the fire department.
We're talking like.
We're tightening belts on the fire department.
Okay. Yes, we would like to have a very highly qualified person to manage a multi-billion-dollar organization. And I think, we can talk about lowering the salary level for the next city manager. Our city manager is retiring. That's a conversation we will have in public. So come to our public meetings and voice those opinions as we go through that recruitment process. Janet?
Yeah, when I ran for council, I checked, and council members received a $1,200 a month stipend. Since that election process was concluded, did this current council or the prior one incorporate a salary for council members? What is your pay?
I received, I just got a letter that said I'm going to get a raise of $46 a month. Okay. That's a 3% or 2.6% raise. So as of July 1st, I suppose it will be, I will get a paycheck twice a month of $658 plus $23. $678
So
twice a month.
It remains as a stipend.
It's a stipend.
Okay.
They tell us that we make $24 an hour.
Thank you for clarifying that, because on the website it's indicating there's a range from 26 to 37,000 per member. So obviously that's a false.
I think what they're doing is, so we pay the 6% OSPR, the PERS-ish benefit, but we also get food at council meetings, and we get reimbursements for if we travel in our role as city councilors. So I think that they're probably saying an entire.
And just real quick, out of curiosity, I am meeting with Elizabeth Butterfield tomorrow.
Jen. How are you? Oh, I could complain, but what would be the point of that?
And it could have been achieved by belt tightening across all agencies.
It was. So, well, our budget process 2 years ago reduced the budget by $25 million. And we went through a process where we were like, okay, so if we don't get our council printed, if we just have them emailed to us, we'll save $3,000. If we, take our meetings virtual on Wednesdays instead of coming to council quarters and get lunch, we'll save $30,000. Okay, so no, I'm just giving an example for just the council related. I'm talking, we did that for every single department, and this budget cycle, we did the same thing. Sarah asked every department head to come with every idea and then we asked her, save as much of core as we can, but everybody's going to have to tighten up. And I'm going to give this to Eliza.
Thank you.
Better detail.
Thank you.
So I think one thing you have to understand when you look at the city's budget is it's not like having a $50 bill. that you can just spend on whatever you want. It's like having a $5 bill and $45 worth of gift cards. And so a large portion of the city's budget is in restricted funding that can only be spent for certain things. And so when you see a lot of things like, okay, well, we didn't ask the Holt Center to cut funding. We didn't ask like a lot of the public works projects at the airport's got some other problems going on right now. But you know, when we didn't ask those departments to cut because their funding was, again, airport was secure because it was coming from a different source that could only be spent on those things. What's left, once you take away all the things that have those special earmarks funding, is police and a lot of the things in the police services, fire and a lot of things in fire services, library, and some planning and development work, and a tiny smidgen of public works and parks. So a lot of the things where you're saying like, well, we didn't ask public works to cut a lot, it's because their source of money is different than our property taxes and general fund, and though it was more secure. Where we're seeing the problem is with our general fund, which is our money that we can kind of spend on whatever we, within reason, whatever we want. And that's the space where we had to kind of look at those cuts. Within that space, we did, like we've over the years we start out with, okay, every department does proportional for what portion of the general fund you're taking. That was one scenario we looked at. That scenario led to cuts to the fire department, which we just heard is not someplace where we have space to cut from. And so then we started having to look at, okay, you know, which hurts more? Closing the downtown library for 2 days a week, or closing a fire station seasonally. And so when we started having to have those kinds of conversations, that's when you started seeing like, okay, it's now a proportional level of cuts between departments, both because of what their funding sources were, and because when you start getting into the details of that, you've just got to kind of start looking at some of those priorities.
City is a lot like school budgets. I get that they're dedicated accounts, but I was just wondering why those were kept isolated under their guise, and take all the agencies, public works and whatever, and actually do the math and say, this is how much our budget shortfall, therefore this is the percentage we need to see sliced within each department, public works, whatever, to achieve that balanced budget without harming the public good. And people say, oh, don't take away animal services. I don't understand why it wasn't done in that fashion, very mathematically, to achieve the result as we do. I have to belt tighten. I have to plan my trips. I know what I have each month. I have to, and I'd like to see the city start applying and not land bank, buying up properties that are on the tax rolls and getting them on, because there's only 60% of the 100% of us putting the bill. All the rest are getting perks.
Travis has had his hand up for 6 minutes too.
And we got some other people in here we'll be fair to as well, so.
Thank you.
Where does the city's real estate acquisition come out of? What part of the budget?
It probably depends on what real estate we're acquiring. So for example, if we get a grant to build a new park, that would probably come out of that grant money. So it would depend on what the real estate that we are acquiring is as to what part of the budget that would come out of.
What part of the budget does real estate, does vacant lot real estate projected to be used for housing in the future come out of when the city buys it?
Again, that would depend a little bit on what the source of the funding.
Where does the funding come? What part of the budget does the funding for real estate acquisition for your land banking come from?
I don't have like the entire budget memorized.
Okay, well,
so I'm trying to
like
think about it right now.
I'd be very, for follow-up, I'd be very curious to know how much of that type of real estate has been acquired in the past couple of years that the city has been very privy to this so-called budget crisis, because I believe that when you're in budget crisis, you don't go around buying land. When I'm broke, I don't buy land for my future cabin in the woods. So that's yeah.
Sold, and most of them that I'm aware of that we've acquired has been coming out as earmarked funds, specifically affordable housing or money that we're getting to build affordable housing. So that's not typically general fund money.
Okay, and then my other question might be good for you, but it might actually be better for Lindsay because she said she was part of a committee for revenue. Where does when entities fail to pay the payroll tax, they accrue penalties. Where do those penalties go when we collect them? What part of the budget?
They would go into the fund that is used for the community safety payroll tax.
So any penalties on top of what is owed as the actual tax also goes into that payroll tax?
Yeah, we go into, because it's a special fund that's set up within the budget. It's like one of those gift cards that is the money that we get from the payroll tax, and funding associated, costs associated with payroll tax and funding that comes in through the payroll tax goes into that special fund.
How many millions of dollars in penalties are sitting out there unable or haven't been collected?
I do not have that number off the top of my head.
That'd be interesting to know. I've got a concern that in this past year alone, in 2024.
We got some other questions we got in here.
Okay, I've only gone.
I had a question before.
I have less than 2 minutes of a question. I'd like to ask my last question.
We've got
a lot of hands up in the room, and we need to be fair to everybody. Okay,
We got to restrict it to.
we got to move on here.
The room's full.
I don't know who got pointed.
So on the current budget that's going to go before the voters, I hear it's labeled as the fire tax. So what percent of the budget that is going to the voters is for the fire department?
So you want to do this one and someone else
I
one?
guess that and have
Okay.
it fill in.
So there's a couple of different pieces there. The city budget doesn't go to the voters. It gets recommended by the budget committee and then goes to city council, who will then vote on the amount of on that budget. I think what you're referring to as potentially going to the voters was the revenue option that we had come up with to try and help fill that gap that we were talking about. And so what that was a fire fee that was passed by council in January, got referred to the ballot and would have gone to the ballot in November. It is likely that it will not end up going to the ballot and not end up going to the voters and not be implemented.
So why is it going to the voters?
Because we instead increased our stormwater fee to allow us to get in $4.7 million to pay to keep the library open 2 days a week, to pay to continue to fund animal services, to provide some money for alternative services and all these other things. We could, in theory, continue to keep that on the ballot and have it go, and then we would have a stormwater fee increase and a fire fee. We have not made that vote yet. We'll see what happens with that vote.
So what you're doing is you're making decisions and not going through the people. And so it's kind of it sounds like crooked politics to me. Because petitions were signed to send that to the voters.
So
it was called the fire tax. It was my understanding that a very low percentage of that was going to go to the fire department, and you had all these other things thrown in, just like the federal government does. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable what the city of Eugene is trying to do to the people. It's ridiculous.
So what I'll say is that the fire fee, the way that it was written, was earmarked 100% would go to fire. That would allow us to free up some of the funds that we would be coming out of the general fund, which would keep us being able to close the library. I'm doing kind of the same thing with the stormwater fee. I agree with you, but that's super weird. And that's What it also means is that we then have that dedicated, we would have had that dedicated earmarked funding for fire. And 2, 3, 4 years down the line, we would have known that that funding was secure, that we had specialized funding for fire. Getting into the question of, should it go to the ballot? Will it go to the ballot? What I'll say is that I personally, once it got referred to the ballot, was happy to let it go. I was like, I think we should let the voters decide whether or not, you know, when it first came up, I'm like, okay, let's pass this, let's get this done, we need to solve this problem. I think there are a lot of people in our community who don't necessarily want to weigh in on every single decision, but would like us to kind of say, like, we want you to figure out how to keep fire funding, we want you to figure out how to keep the pool open, keep the library open, go ahead and do that. So I was ready to do that. When they did the petition, I was like, okay, they want to vote on it, let's let them vote on it. And then what would have happened had we not come up with a stormwater fee at that point is that the library would be closing every Sunday and every Monday, starting in like 3 weeks. And so that became a question of, do we put in place sort of a partial solution to keep these services running? Or do we let them close and see what happens in November? So that was what the majority of council decided to do. So.
So I was listening to that explanation, and I want to assure there's one thing you understand about the funding that goes to fire through the fire fee. It's not a tax. If it's a tax, we have to go up. The fee means that we could have, through council, made it happen, and that took some process to get. But as far as the funding goes, yes, 100% goes to fire, but then we turn and give 80% of it back to bridge the library and the other services. So that's my badge on explanation. Now I have a question. I'm going to take my badge off from there as a citizen. And you may know, I don't know, one of you guys would probably tell me, why did you call it a fire fee?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So calling it a fire service fee was a long-term intent. In year one or in biennium one, if it had gone into effect, it was originally came out of the revenue committee who had been asked to close a general fund gap. And we were going in that first biennium. If it had gone through, we would have used that to pay general fund services and prevent these cuts that we saw primarily. So the revenue committee was asked to solve for an $8 million gap. So they brought back the fire service fee as a solution to bring in 10 million so that we could do 2 million in new fire services, shift fire services into the fund, and free up general fund gaps in that first biennium. The intent long-term was that concept of shifting money into that fire fund would continue until someday, hopefully, all of our fire services were paid out of that fire fund. And if we found new revenue solutions in a long-term sector, if we got a solution to 5 and 50 at the statewide level, as these things started to happen and we were able to backfill the general fund from other directions, we could continue to shift into that fire service fund and use that fund as dedicated fire service funding in out years to minimize these fire cuts and take it out of that general fund conversation that happens each time we have a cut budget. And so long-term, it was hopefully, it was the intent and the idea was that it might leave fire with more protected funding that we could eventually start to increase after we backfill the general fund with other solutions down the road. We weren't going to be there in biennium one, so we were starting, and so that's why it was designed to be, it didn't have a sunset or anything because it was meant to be a permanent shift in that direction with, we get 2 million new fire funding in biennium one, and then as we start to fix our general fund through other ways and build our tax base and all these other ongoing conversations we're having separately, it would have gradually grown into more new fire funding and more protected fire funding. That was the long-term goal. we ended up going a different way, and I also share the expectation that I don't think we're gonna see it go to the ballot and or be implemented at this point, but that was the initial concept.
So unfortunately, the city council chose to be misleading and lying that you're gonna put 100% to the fire. Oh, by the way, we're gonna get 80% back to the city. That is dishonesty.
Yes.
And that's what the citizens are angry
Yes.
about, because you cannot trust city government.
Yes.
Question, let me ask you one question. This, I'm not even gonna try and pretend I can pronounce his name, but the Lane County Administrator said it's really interesting.
Steve Overheisky?
Whatever, I'll let you go. But at a recent commission meeting, he said, Moranci pointed out that the tax rate for Eugene property tax rate is conversely. In other words, the Lane County tax rate, property tax rate is lower than average. But he said Eugene conversely is 37% higher than that of other similarly sized cities. He also went on to say the average among the cities, not including Eugene, is $5. The city of Eugene's total is $7.87. So there's a 2.87 difference greater between our largest cities and the others. Interesting, 37% higher. Please, could you please address that?
So when I heard Steve make that comment, I actually went and looked at all of the different tax rates for all the different cities. And the base property tax rate was set in the 90s. And Eugene cannot change its base property tax rate. Nobody can change their base property tax rate. And so Eugene's base property tax rate, and I didn't catch all of the numbers that you said there.
37% higher than other similarly sized cities. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We do have a slightly higher base tax rate than other cities. A lot of those other cities also have more bonds and levies than we do because they're trying to balance out that lower rate. They run into different spaces. Right. There's also different levels of service that we as a community have decided that we wanted. One of the things I hear a lot is, well, Salem spends half as much money on their library as Eugene does. Why are we spending twice as much on our libraries as Salem, right?
Because you turned it into a homeless shelter.
Actually, here's the reason. Salem's library is open 1/3 as many hours as ours. So when you look at like the amount of library service that we get, the number of hours that our library is open, the number of hours that people in our community are able to access a library, the number of branch libraries we have, Salem's paying half as much and getting 1/3 the amount of library service.
So that's Lane County Administrator is claiming that you guys get a higher rate than other cities. I think you need to get a hold of him, start talking to him, because that's a pretty serious claim that he's making. Very serious one, in the sense that he's also saying Lane County gets much lower tax rates than other counties. So somebody some year is making a mistake or lying.
No,
so if that's the case, we shouldn't be having this issue. This is what many of us are saying. We've known for years now that the city has had serious problems with its deficit or with its budget because we're very weak fundamentally economically here. So we've known this for many, many years.
So I don't want it to come across like anybody is being misleading, because I think Steve is right. Steve Overheisky, the county administrator, is right when he says that the county's base property tax rate is lower than a lot of the other counties. This is in part because in the 90s, when all of these property tax rates were set, when the state ballot measure went through and said, okay, whatever you're charging now, that's what you gotta charge in all perpetuity with no ability to change it. Wayne County was getting a lot of timber money. And communities, timber money. We were cutting down a lot of trees, and we were getting a lot of money because we were cutting down a lot of trees. And so Wayne County's property tax rate was very, very low because they didn't need a higher property tax rate because they had this other source of revenue coming in. That's caused a lot of problems for the county now because that timber money has dried up. They're not getting that revenue from logging, and so they're facing a lot of their own struggles.
Okay. I think we need to talk to you. I'd like to basically hear what he has to say to clear this up, because this is a serious issue. And I think we need to know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and I will say that you're right that Eugene does have a higher property tax rate than per dollars in the county. we also spend on different things and have different responsibilities. Different funding sources. The county gets a lot more federal money than the city does.
Coupled with that, I attended and spoke at the Port Shade board meeting, and although Judy Newman saw to it that it was not agenda items, but the tax assessor, Mary, her last name, spoke at Judy Newman's invitation, not agenda items. There were probably 30 people, 8 of us spoke, 6 unfavorably about the district, 2 not. But what she spoke to was that she and the state and county assessors have been ordered to raise our property taxes and to hire on qualified tax appraisers that are well equipped to buck up against the commercial real estate buyers and their high priced attorneys to raise our tax rates. Now, I found it astonishing that this was not publicized or agendized, and I'm after the 12-page report she provided to each of the board members, but nothing to the audience. So it's, and one of the board members spoke, and she was concerned that with this coming out of the hatch, whether people would continue here in Lane County to vote yes on the bonds and levies.
So
We're gonna, I didn't really hear a huge question there, but as far as questions go, whenever you're done. We need to be fair to.
I heard Mary talk about her thing several times. And so what I want to clarify is that what she has been talking about is that if you build new stuff on your property, so like if you do a giant remodel or if you build a second house on there or something like that, in theory, that should get assessed, and that should then, you should be paying property taxes on that new thing that you built. That doesn't change the property tax rate on your base house or change the rate that if you don't build a new thing. And so what Mary's talking about is that the county assessor's office has been fairly underfunded for quite some time. That means that they do not have enough property assessors to go out and be like, oh, hey, I built a shed in my backyard and I should be paying property taxes on it. They don't know about that. And so what she is hoping to do is to be able to hire some more assessors so that we can capture property taxes from new construction that has been built that we were previously unaware of. So if you haven't built something new on your lot in a while, it's not really going to affect you. So it's not like we're going out and raising taxes on everybody. It's making sure that we are aware of what people have that they should be paying.
Like quick green, that was.
I'm going to move on to
somebody else here.
You ready?
Yeah. Oh, sweet.
And then the gentleman behind you, and then we're gonna get going on time.
Quickly, is Eugene ever going to consider a small sales tax? Because we can only ask for so much from the property owners. And I understand that this is difficult for the property owners, but at some point, and I know people are going to resist it in the past, but the cuts have to be draconian, or we need to find a new source of revenue. You can't continue to come up with these small little sewer fees or Ponzi scheme, the money from fire, taking it out of the budget, creating a fire fee, and you're going to do this and that. Before you know it, it looks like something out of New York City sidewalk. Where do you see these funds coming from? And I don't see why a small sales tax is something that people automatically have to drag into themselves. I mean, there are a lot of renters and a lot of out-of-state money here. If you can afford $100,000 boat or a second, this or that, people can afford. These are the people who can afford these higher rates, is what I'm saying, as opposed to somebody who's retired on a fixed income.
Yeah, so what I'll say is that Lindsay referred earlier to the big book of revenue. And so the big book of revenue is every single thing that we can think of. It doesn't have a bake sale in it, but I think we should put a bake sale in it. But it's everything that we can think of that could bring in revenue.
Well,
Every time.
Let me interrupt really quick. I listened at the beginning of this presentation tonight about the duplicity of monies that are going out between Eugene and Springfield for their fire department. And you say you're tens of millions of dollars short, but yet Eugene does this, Springfield does that. If you put it all together in Lane County, Lane, general, what you're talking about, this fire department thing, you probably feel freed up tens of millions of dollars. Why is it so hard to run a county sensibly? I don't get it. And that's my frustration.
So I'm gonna go back to the sales tax question. Sales tax, restaurant taxes, those kind of things are things that are included and are part of those discussions every time. I'm very in support of resuming that discussion and continuing to have that discussion. Every time I go through the big book of revenue, one of the things I look at is this something that's gonna layer more taxes on people who are already paying taxes? Is there something that we can bring in that's going to target a different group that's not already paying taxes? That's one of the reasons why we ended up with the fire fee as opposed to some other option, is because the fire fee is not being a property tax based, it's based on something else, which means that places like the U of O, which does not pay property taxes because they're a nonprofit, would have had to pay the fire. And so that's one of the reasons why we did, is because it's targeting a different group. And I'm always going to be looking for revenue sources that target a different group. And I will say, I was in San Francisco, I was traveling this weekend, I went to Ashland, and I paid for my restaurant bill. I was on a trip, I could eat in a restaurant, I could afford that. And it had restaurant tax on it, and I'm like, great. You know, I'm willing to pay this to help support this community that I am a tourist in, that I'm visiting, that I'm using their resources, that I'm not paying property taxes in Ashland or San Francisco. So.
Gentleman in green shirt, last question there. Oh, then Jim.
There's no sales tax in Oregon, and the naysayers forget about that. The property Prop 5 and Prop 50 limit the amount of revenue that cities can get for their general fund. If you have, like you were signalized it, if you have built a brand new house, it's assessed as the house is in the neighborhood, the comps, it's not assessed as a brand new house. There's all sorts of loopholes around that. City council is struggling to balance the budget, and it's really easy to say, oh, they're corrupt and things like that. But if there's not enough revenue, there's just not enough resources to pay for this. So I think we do need a sales tax, and we need to reform the Prop 50 and Prop 5.
One question, Jen, online.
Yeah, I'm, as someone who lost their home in a fire and then had their property tax triple, I certainly am, sympathetic and feel the stretch of the extra $400 a month that cost me, in addition to, losing one's entire home and 3 years of your life. I am curious because there are different types of property owners in the county. And so if you can speak a little bit about some of the efforts that may be going to some of the people who have either, vacant properties or things that are only used for Airbnbs that are driving down housing supply, or, some of the really big apartment buildings, not all of which are always rented and maybe aren't accessible to people who are from here. Some of those other populations, but specifically kind of like not the neighborhood person who's lucky enough to own their home.
So again, under the Oregon's property tax law, the specific property taxes, we can't mess with regarding whether it's vacant, whether it's not. It has to do with what it's assessed at, and we don't have a lot of control over how to do that. There are some things that we can look at as far as, so for example, vacant property, right? Resident people who are not living in the property. There's actually a state bill that's going through, and I don't know if it's going to pass or not. Who knows what's going to happen with those. Sorry, I keep trying to look at you and realize I'm turning my back towards you. That would allow, for example, a fee on a vacant property. So if you have a house and it's targeted really towards like people who have vacation homes or people who have like properties that are just not renting out, that would permit us to like assess the fee on those kinds of things. And so as we continue to move forward with this, we're going to be exploring like all of those different types of options that allow us to say, okay, we want to find like ways to do this revenue that is going to come from like not just the property tax people. And we run into a challenge with this because you were making a comment earlier about like, okay, it's a million different little fees, and that's frustrating for everybody. And then also like finding a solution that's one thing that is gonna like help fill all those gaps. It's a balance of saying like, do we want a lot of little things that target different people in different ways? Or do we want one larger thing that's gonna help fill a lot of that gap more comprehensively?
I just want to chime in, as we looked at all of those pieces, we definitely look at things like a vacancy tax or vacancy fee. And it's like, what is the capacity, like what could it bring in? You're saying all these little pieces, right? Maybe it could bring in $2 million, except that to figure out who in which house is vacant and then charge them and send them a bill. Oh, well, that's going to cost $1.5 million. So guess what? We only like net 500,000. So how many of those little things do we actually have to implement to get to the big thing? That's what Eliza was really, alluding to, and that we looked at so many of those, like an admission tax for, the Holt Center, or, these ticket fees, or there's just, we looked at all of these little pieces, and at first I was like, maybe we could piece together like 11 different things that hit people with discretionary income, right, to spend. I was like, yeah, okay, I could pay an additional $1 on a Holt Center ticket. I'm willing to do that. I'm going to the Holt Center. I'm doing that with my fun money, right? Or if I let my house sit vacant for some reason for 2 years, like I deserve to be a fee, sure. But we could not compile 18 of those to hit $12 million, $11 million. So right now we're looking at how do we move forward? Do we bring some of those into fund specific programs that we want to keep? Do we want to designate something specific to sustainability or resiliency or housing, or what is it? What is our next steps? We are going to be doing that. We're going to be doing that very publicly. And for anyone who says like we're not being transparent, we have had 32 public conversations about this, many of them being like, this is awful and we don't know exactly what to do, and we're trying really hard with our $1,200 a month and our full-time jobs and and our volunteerism to try to figure this out. There's a lot of people who are doing that work, and as continue asking us questions. We're here too.
We get 2.5 minutes to talk.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much a month. So it's you talking to us, not me talking to you.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that.
Can I ask one more
Thank you all
question?
for being here, and I will see you all soon. Thank you to our guests.
We've got 6 minutes. We've got 6 minutes.
Travis, we're trying to be fair to everybody here if we can. We've got a couple of announcements we got to get to. The mission has been gracious enough to allow us to use this facility and host us. And we gave them a time frame to be out of here, and we're gonna miss it here today. So thank you to the mission. Mike, Brett, thank you very much for being here for that. Ty, Eliza, Lindsay, thank you very much. The next meeting, we are going to be the second Wednesday in September. Janet also, I don't know why I had you on my mind. Margaret had another thing she wanted to mention. What we're talking about next meeting in September is, we're gonna just off the top of her head here right now. She's gonna text me right now, right?
We're gonna maybe talk about the train.
Yes, we're gonna talk about the train stuff going on locally, what's going through town here, the stuff. She's gonna text me right now.
It's
September
10th
10th is the next meeting. It's a port project that we're gonna get some people to speak on, and we get some questions answered. So thank you once again for everybody that came and spoke and asked questions. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time.
Great job, Derek. Thank you very much.
Where'd she come from? Thanks so much. Thanks for being here. Yeah, they'll try to solve the real problem in 2 hours.
Are you all set?
2 hours spent, yeah.
How can I see this meeting?
This meeting, I believe, Durandar, will be on YouTube page or Facebook page.
Yeah, I'll
YouTube.
repost it.
It'll be reposted on YouTube, Whitaker Community Council.
Tomorrow.
If you
Not tonight, come on.
Not tonight.
I've got so much stuff going on. We'll try and get it posted out. All of the meetings will be posted up there. It just takes a little bit of time to get them there.
Yeah.
But no, I appreciate it. Where did Brett say he's going to?
And